Today, we're going to dive into a huge legal battle, right from India's early days. I mean, this case forced a brand new country to ask some really tough questions about its own constitution. This is the story of how the very definition of personal liberty was debated, narrowed down, and then completely transformed.
And really, it all boils down to this one question. Think about it. Can a government do everything by the book, pass a law through all the proper channels, and still end up with something that's just, well, totally unfair? Keep that question in your head because that's exactly what the Supreme Court of India had to wrestle with.
So let's meet the man at the center of all this, A.K. Gopalan. He was a major figure, a well-known communist leader. Now, you've got to put yourself back in the late 1940s. India is a brand new country, just born from a really violent partition, and everything feels kind of shaky. In a fragile environment like that, political leaders like Gopalan were often seen as a threat, which put him on a direct collision course with the government. And look at this. Gopalan wasn't just arrested once. This was a pattern. He was in and out of jail starting in 1947. And get this, even when the courts threw out his convictions, he'd just be rearrested under some new order. But the real kicker came in 1950 with this new, pretty powerful law, the Preventative Detention Act. This thing gave the government the power to lock people up without a trial, just because they suspected someone might cause trouble. Well, Gopalan wasn't about to just accept this. He took his case straight to the Supreme Court. And by doing that, he basically forced the judges to solve two massive constitutional puzzles that nobody had really tackled before. Okay, so puzzle number one. It all hinged on these four little words in Article 21 of the Indian Constitution: procedure established by law. What does that even mean? On one side, Gopalan's lawyers said it should be like the American idea of due process, that the law itself has to be fair and just. But the government's lawyers, they argued it was much simpler. They said, hey, as long as Parliament establishes a procedure by passing a law, that's it. It's legal, whether you think it's fair or not. And that brings us to the second big puzzle. How do you even read the part of the Constitution that lists out our fundamental rights? Gopalan's argument was that his detention didn't just mess with his right to liberty, but also his right to move around freely. His point was, hey, these rights are all connected. They're a web. You can't just pull on one thread without affecting the others. The government, on the other hand, saw them as totally separate islands in an ocean. A law that hits one island doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the others. So the big question is, what did the court decide back in 1950? Well, they went with a really narrow and honestly a pretty restrictive view of things. It was a decision that would cast a long shadow over Indian law for decades. But here's a crucial detail. It wasn't a unanimous decision. Nope, it was 5-1. You had 5 judges on one side and just one lone voice pushing back. We're definitely coming back to that one dissenting voice in just a minute. So what did that majority believe? They basically saw the Constitution's rights as being in separate, sealed boxes. They said, look, Article 19 is the movement box, and Article 21 is the liberty box. Since this law is about detention, we only need to open the liberty box. The other one stays shut. So let's break down exactly what they said. First, personal liberty. Oh, that just means you can't be physically locked up. Nothing more. Second, that phrase, procedure established by law, they took it literally. If Parliament passed the law, that was the procedure. The court said it had no power to ask if that procedure was actually fair. And the result of all this, the Preventative Detention Act was declared perfectly constitutional and Gopalan's detention was legal. But let's go back to that 5-1 vote. Who was that one judge? It was Justice Fazl Ali. And he saw the whole thing completely differently. His opinion, even though it lost at the time, turned out to be, well, let's just say it planted a seed that would grow into something huge decades later. See, Justice Fazl Ali was all about that interconnected web idea. He basically said that if you put these fundamental rights into separate boxes, you suck all the meaning out of them. I mean, what good is your freedom of speech if you're locked away in a cell? What good is personal liberty if you can't even move freely? He argued you have to test a law against all the rights it might affect, not just one. And for almost 30 years, that's how it was. The separate boxes idea from the Gopalan case was the rule. But then, 1978 happened. A new case, Maneka Gandhi versus the Union of India, landed in the Supreme Court, and it changed everything. This was the moment of the great reversal. The Supreme Court looked back at its own decision in Gopalan's case and said, you know what, we got that wrong. They threw out the whole separate boxes idea and instead championed Justice Fazl Ali's dissenting view. They introduced this new idea that Articles 14, 19, and 21, rights to equality, freedom, and life, they aren't separate islands. No, they form a golden triangle where each one protects the other two. I mean, look at this shift. It was nothing short of a legal revolution. Before, rights were in separate silos. Now, they're an interconnected golden triangle. Before, personal liberty just meant not being in a cage. Now, it's way broader, including the right to live with dignity. And the biggest change of all, that phrase procedure established by law was totally redefined. It now meant that the procedure itself had to be fair, just, and reasonable. The court finally had an answer to our big question. No, a law cannot be legal if it is unfair. Okay, so this is all fascinating legal history, right? But why should you care about a case from so long ago? Because this journey, from Gopalan to Maneka Gandhi, it fundamentally rewired the relationship between the Indian people and their government. It really all boils down to how the meaning of one single phrase completely transformed over time. Step 1. Back in 1950, it was basically a green light for whatever the government wanted to do. But step 2, by 1978, that same phrase had been turned into a shield for the citizen. It became a demand that any law that takes away your liberty has to pass the test of fairness. And step 3, this whole shift basically baked the principles of fairness, of natural justice, right into the heart of Article 21. And that, right there, is the big takeaway. The story of A.K. Gopalan is just incredible proof that a constitution isn't some dusty old book on a shelf. It's a living, breathing thing, and its meaning is always up for debate. His loss in court and that powerful dissent from Justice Fazl Ali eventually led to a revolution. It proved that one person's voice can pave the way for a much stronger protection of freedom for everyone. And it leaves us with a question that every democracy has to keep asking itself. Who really gets to decide what freedom means?